It is Friday. Well, what a start. That's okay, because now we have someone to edit that out. All right. It is Friday, August 10th, 2018. And you know what that means if you are very in tune with the NFL schedule. August 9th was the Seahawks' first game against the Indianapolis Colts in the preseason for 2018. So that means that if it's Friday, August 10th, 2018, at 3000 NFL Mock Draft, we're talking about the Seahawks Colts preseason game. We waited off on the podcast until Friday this week instead of Thursday, Wednesday, so that we could talk about the game. And the Seahawks play the Colts at home. They lose that game 19-17, but still plenty of positive takeaways from the game for the Seattle Seahawks. I'm Kenneth Arthur. With me, as always, is Rob Staten, and we're going to get right into it. Rob, you know, there was a lot to watch for last night. Young players, old players, how they would fit. You know, obviously in a preseason game, especially the first preseason game, you're only going to get so much of the first team. And for the Seattle Seahawks, that was one drive on offense, maybe a little bit more on defense, but pretty much just the one drive. And if we're going to focus on the offense, you know, Russell Wilson looked really good, as, you know, would be expected against the Indianapolis Colts anyway, but he especially looked good in the preseason, even without Doug Baldwin back there. But everyone was really pretty much focused on the running back competition and how things would work. And it's really not a competition, I don't even think, but how things would work between Chris Carson and Rasheem Green. So, Rob, in the first game here that we get to see with pads on against another team, what were your early thoughts here on Carson and Penny?
Well, before I answer that, Kenny, can I just say I'm going to go off track a little bit here and just say one thing. I think that the reaction to last night's games on the internet has been appalling. And I think that people need to stop overanalyzing preseason game one. The number of tweets that I've seen saying so-and-so was having was bad, so-and-so was good, talking about the rookies specifically. I saw one post that someone had put together. I can't remember which website it was for, but it was a list it said good, bad, injured. So the good list was about 4 names. The bad list was about 20 names. And then there was a group with like Darius Geis in it, who were the injured group. I mean, like, we're talking about rookies who have maybe played a quarter, maybe a couple of quarters in their first preseason game. It's the first time they've played NFL. Can we not give these guys an opportunity to learn taking the next level and just fit into the league before we start saying whether they're good or bad? And this snap, there's stuff about Rasheem Penny in the last couple of days. People saying, I read a couple of things saying, oh, how does he fit in? And Carson's, but for God's sake, just give these guys an opportunity to actually do something in a proper game before we start over-analyzing and saying, I'm not going to say anybody had a bad game who was a rookie in that. This is a learning curve for these guys. And I think that, the internet and social media has a lot to answer for in the world generally. And I think the way that people are treating these rookies is an absolute joke. So just stop. If you're going to write a negative post about a rookie in his first preseason game, you need to give your head a shake. That's the first thing.
Since when we can get back to specifically Carson and Penny, I'll just interject just to throw my thoughts in there, and of course, completely agree, and just also say, like, there was stuff being said about Rasheem Penny or Chris Carson or whoever. There was stuff being said about guys before there had even been a preseason game, and there were talk about there's been talk all summer and especially with how, all the stuff about whether or not Chris Carson, why did the Seahawks use a first-round pick on a running back if Chris Carson's going to be the starter and all this kind of stuff? And, first of all, because teams are using multiple running backs, just like you don't have one wide receiver that's your starter and the other ones don't matter. Now teams are using multiple running backs. And I've gone on and on about my thoughts on not using first-round picks on running backs, but the Seahawks did it. And so, just looking at it objectively, you can still say that Rasheem Penny, for what their purposes of drafting him were, has not been a waste. This is exactly what's happened so that they could have several options. And there was, in terms of guys were tracking, someone throwing an interception in practice and stuff like that and talking about all that kind of stuff, where, quarterbacks are being asked to let's see if you can make this pass. I think that it might not work or whatever, or try and see if you can do these things. And if it gets picked, it gets picked. It's just practice. But now people are being judged on it, and you can't be judged on your practices. And preseason games are just glorified practices with another team. So it's certainly not, they're trying things out for sure. and even with the positive things, like Rasheem Green, who had a really nice game and has had a really nice camp. And there's no reason to not say positive things about Rasheem Green, but he's playing against Joe Haig, not Anthony Costanzo. So it's a pretty big difference. And you got to take all of these things into account for sure. And so, like, we can watch Chris Carson and Rashad Penny and say, oh, physically in this game, we saw them have moves and do things that would make you feel positively that they can continue to do those against regular season competition. So if as far as that goes, Rob, how do you feel about that performance last night?
Yeah, I mean, just one, final point on this, and I promise I will answer the question. I just, when I think back to last year, the Seahawks' first preseason game, I think, was against the Los Angeles Chargers. And Tedric Thompson misread a play. It led to a deep throw downfield or a yards after the catch touchdown. It was a huge passing play, which, Thompson definitely made a mistake. I still think it's taken Pete Carroll saying that he's been one of the stars of training camp for people to move on from that. I think that one play stuck in people's mind. All of a sudden, Tedric Thompson's 40-yard dash time of a 4.60, that was evidence that he wasn't quick enough to play free safety in the NFL. Even though, I put the piece on the blog last week to show that he's marginally faster than Keanu Neal and the other safety in Atlanta. I mean, the two starting safeties in Atlanta ran very similar 40 times to Tedric Thompson, but people were obsessed with this 40 time purely because he got burned in the first preseason game of the first camp and off season of his NFL career. And people just lingered on that and made a judgment on Tedric Thompson off that one play. And I'm sick of it. I enjoyed today watching every throw of Josh Allen and Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson and seeing all of the things that they have to work on whilst acknowledging how good they looked as well in terms of their talent. They're all very different. But I think there's reasons to be excited about some of these young quarterbacks coming in. I bet someone watched Deshaun Watson a year ago and overanalyzed his performance. Stop overanalyzing rookies in the first week of preseason and don't do it for the rest of preseason. Don't talk about negatives. This is when you want them to do the negative things so they can go and watch the tape back again and learn from it. That's what the point of these games is for these young players. So I saw something about Ronald Jones, people criticizing him for his ability in the passing game. And I've seen, a lot of analysis about Nick Chubb and Rashad Penny's not special because Chris Carson is, and it's stupid stuff like this. Just stop it. Just give them an opportunity, for God's sake, in the league before you start criticizing them, because they read this stuff. They're on social media, these players. They're all young guys. They're 21 years old. Of course they're on social media. Stop writing it. Stop getting in their heads. Just give them an opportunity to get into the league before you start hammering them. I mean, it really irritated me today to be reading that garbage on Twitter all the time and read these articles. I just don't talk about the negatives. In terms of the positives, very quickly on Penny, I thought Carson looked fantastic. I thought Penny looked good. I think if you look at the stats for Penny, you're going to probably misread the situation. I thought the way that he bounced outside on that one play looked really sharp and quick. There was one play where he got a good 6 yards. There was one play where he lost a load of yards when he was smacked in the backfield and had absolutely no chance of breaking anything there. Marshawn Lynch would have been dropped for a loss. So I think overall it was a pretty uneventful start for Rashad Penny, but certainly by no means a negative one. And I like the look of the two running backs who are going to be leading the way this year.
As far as the tight end situation, Russell Wilson targeted Nick Vannett, I think, 3 times on the drive that he was in there with, including the touchdown pass, and the tight end situation under Brian Schottenheimer. We don't know what's going to happen with Ed Dixon when he returns. Obviously, I think the idea would be that he's a starter, and we also don't know, we would need to see Doug Baldwin back in there to, have a real fair distribution of how things go on. But this is now the 3rd year for Nick Vannett, and he was a 3rd-round pick. And they've also got Will Disley, who, a lot of people are high on for his blocking, including last night. So they've got 3 tight ends in there, and, it seems that maybe they could use all 3. Do you feel more positively about Nick Vannett at this point, and the idea that Wilson and Schottenheimer would trust him so much on that first drive, or, like with everything else, being a preseason game, just not really being able to take away much from it?
I think the positives with Vannett is that I think Pete Carroll mentioned, or somebody mentioned recently, that he'd been suffering with a bit of a back issue or something in the last couple of years, and that he was finally healthy, and that you'd seen a noticeable difference from him as a consequence of that. And they featured him a bit yesterday. And the thing that I like the look of the most, Kenny, is that there seem to be legitimate signs there. And I know it's preseason and a lot can change when the actual stuff starts, but there seems to be a legit sort of focus on running the ball and then play action and the tight ends being involved. You know, for a number of years, they've said that they want to be this type of offense and they haven't been. And it really does look as if their commitment to going back to the run and being the type of offense that Pete Carroll has always talked about is definitely there. They're featuring the tight ends, play action, running the ball, the passing game, connecting with the running backs and the running game. It looks as if that's all come into play. So I felt that was very positive. Good to see Vannett get a touchdown. Good to see Will Disley involved. And Ed Dixon still got to come back into this. Swoops is there. I'm sure we'll see a bit more of him in preseason as it goes on. So, yeah, I think that was a really positive start. And the starting offense, I think, was a positive across the board. You know, the offensive line, I thought, played very well. Wilson looked sharp. The receivers looked sharp. The tight ends. I think it was a decent start against a pretty average Indianapolis defense, and it's going to be fun now to see how they're going to move on and play tougher opponents and to see if they can keep this momentum building, because I think they are going to have to lean on the offense quite a lot this year.
And, you know, the offense after Russell Wilson, not as good, you know, trying to run out there with Austin Davis and then Alex McGuff, and then it didn't go so well. You know, an interception in the end zone, and today the Seahawks are working out quarterback Josh Johnson, according to Ian Rappaport just now. So they're looking at maybe Josh Johnson, bringing in Marshawn Lynch's cousin to compete for the backup job. Certainly, it just at least signifies that they're not comfortable now with those two guys. And one guy that they're not still talking to, apparently, is Colin Kaepernick. So what are your thoughts on the options behind Russell Wilson right now?
Well, they haven't really had a very good backup quarter. I like Austin Davis. You know, I interviewed him back in the day when he was at Southern Miss. I like him as a guy. I think the fact that he gave the time up that he did, you know, I was talking to him for about an hour back, you know, what was it, 2011. So I like him. I like him as a guy. Got to know him a little bit in that hour and like what he's about. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that he's going to win this job. I thought his drive was pretty good. I think the interception was careless on his behalf. I think that Reynolds' his route and that play is pretty awful as well. I mean, he doesn't finish the route. He kind of pulls up a little bit and seemed a bit unsure of what he was supposed to be doing there. And he's supposed to run into the corner. And I don't think that helped Austin Davis. But at the same time, he needs to recognize that and not just throw that ball into the hands of the defender. So that was a mistake from him. But I think there was the nice play to David Moore, wasn't there, in that drive as well? And, you know, I think that Austin Davis as a backup who knows Brian Schottenheimer's offense is going to be a useful thing. I just wonder, Kenny, whether this looking at quarterbacks now is because they just think that Magoo's he's not going to be in this competition, and whether that means they're going to, you know, just cut him outright and just think that no, you know, we took a 7th round flyer on the gab, it's not going to be, or whether they, you know, and bring somebody else to compete with Austin Davis so it's a proper competition, so that the final half of a preseason game, which is what's going to happen in the 4th game, for example, is not just going to be a slow clunking. I mean, the offense completely shut down yesterday. It felt like when Magoo was in there, and this is what it's been ever since Tavares Jackson left the team. You know, you get to the second half of a preseason game, and the Seahawks can never move the ball. And I always kind of feel like, because the quarterback is so bad and has been so bad for the last few years in that situation, you never really learn anything about the running backs, the receivers, the tight ends, the defensive line, because you've just got no chance of moving the ball. And I wonder whether they want someone who can, at least against the third stringers, can actually set up a couple of drives so they can actually learn about other people on the team, and whether they're going to move Magoo out and get this guy in so that, you know, or somebody else in, so that they can maybe just give themselves a chance of keeping some drives going in the second half. I wonder if that's going to be. It might be that they just want some legit competition for Austin Davis. I'm not sure. I think it's a bit weird that over the years they've not really done enough. You know, they haven't drafted. Look at the care, for example, that Green Bay puts into its backup quarterbacks and churns through them, and put in the Sean Kaiser this year. You know, that they consider and want to constantly be working on a possible backup or someone who could be the heir apparent one day or something like that. And I think it's a bit weird that the Seahawks have never really gone down that. I wonder if it's because of the way Russell Wilson is and they want someone who can fit in if Wilson goes down. I don't know why they haven't just gone and found, you know, a really solid veteran backup somewhere who can fill in. Maybe it's because of cost, maybe because it's finances. Maybe they will consider that in the future if they've got a bit more cap room. But yeah, it just feels like, for me, it feels like Magoo is just sort of holding a position on the roster till he gets cut, and maybe they'll put him on the practice squad, maybe they won't. I just don't see how he's going to, in the next three games, get into any kind of competition with Austin Davis here.
Defensively, Rasheem Green is a guy that was thrust into an earlier role, an earlier starting role than expected. I just wrote about him for Field Gulls just before this podcast. You can check that out if you want to. There's also something there on the from earlier this week by Matty Brown on the Tedric Thompson play from the Chargers last year that you were talking about. So if you were interested in that play, you can check out that video and breakdown as well on Field Gulls. But Rasheem Green, was 20 years old when the draft came around, turned 21 in May. Thoughts of he's got a lot of potential, but there are definitely things to work on. And then Deion Jordan gets hurt. Deion Jordan may not be back for a while. And, some thoughts that he could be gone for a really extended period of time. Frank Clark has been sidelined. They had to move up, Barkevious Mingo and Jacob Martin. And, it's really been a problem with the pass rush. And that was even before the injury to Deion Jordan and Frank Clark. They were already having an issue. So if Rasheem Green could have any sort of impact as a rookie, that would be a really welcome surprise. And he's gotten really high marks in training camp. KJ Wright has said that he's one of the standout young players, along with Tedric Thompson in camp so far. And then he has 1.5 sacks against the Colts. Like I said, it was against Joe Haig and not against Anthony Costanzo. But Green had a really nice game, and there was, you play up to whatever you can play up to regardless of the competition, and Green dominated in many ways for his first game here in the NFL preseason. And so you've got to feel positive about that, even if, the pass rush as a whole still feels like it is wanting. So, Rob, it's been a topic of conversation. We've talked about how the pass rush is the weakest thing going on for the Seahawks. We haven't talked a lot about Rasheem Green because, I don't know what kind of expectations either one of us could really have for the guy, other than the fact that, hey, this might be happening and it might be happening sooner than he's ready for, but he didn't look not ready last night. Certainly things will be going differently in week 1 if it's going against Garrett Bowles, week 2 against Charles Leno, and then week 3 against Tyron Smith. I mean, those are really good left tackles. If he was asked to start against them in the regular season, it's a whole different ball game. But Rasheem Green off to a nice start. Thoughts on Green and the pass rush as a whole?
Thought Green was fantastic. Really good to see. During the sort of the draft season, I regularly mocked him in the first round. He's got that talent. He only fell because of the injury issues that Pete Carroll and John Schneider referenced at the end of the draft. I thought he looked really good. And the great thing is, Kenny, it's one of my big things that we've talked about on the blog for a number of years is that I don't really like pass rushers in college who are just speed rushers. That's one of the reasons why I didn't really like Harold Landry is that, the players that just win with speed in college, when they take the next step up, everybody's bigger and faster. So it doesn't necessarily translate unless you are absolutely lightning quick. Most people don't end up being Von Miller at the next level. A lot of them don't have a counter, have relied on speed throughout their career. And when they can't rely on the speed anymore, they don't have anything. And they become one-dimensional and they become easy to defend. So to see pass rushers, what I look for in college a lot is hand placement. Can you convert speed to power? Can you jam into the chest, disengage, get around, use your hands? Have you got a counter move? Are you thinking 2 steps ahead? Are you setting up a tackle? You're doing 2 plays where you're not expecting to get the sack, but on the 3rd play you will do because you've set up the left tackle. And the thing about Green was that he wasn't just winning with speed. He wasn't just winning with power. He seemed to be thinking about what he was doing. He got great hand use. And I thought it was a really exciting start. Now, whether or not that's going to be enough to really elevate the Seahawks. I mean, you're talking about Deion Jordan there. It's disappointing because you put a healthy Deion Jordan. When's the last time we saw that? Probably in Oregon. A healthy Deion Jordan, a healthy Frank Clark, and a healthy Rasheem Green on the field, and you feel pretty good about that. There's still a question mark, but you feel content with that. You take Jordan off, and then you're down to 2 guys. And yeah, Mingo's going to chip in, and Martin's going to chip in, and maybe Shaquem's going to chip in there, maybe Marcus Smith. But I don't think Green and Clark is enough. And it's a major issue. I wonder what they're going to do in the next couple of weeks, whether they're going to try and get somebody in, whether they want to be as aggressive as they were last year with Sheldon Richardson. I think they're going to turn the page on that. And I think he may be more of a long game now rather than thinking we've got to be competing, got to be going for this year. It is a good draft defensive lineman next year, but whether or not the Seahawks are going to be really high enough in the draft to go after the top guys, and that Nick Bosa is Joey Bosa's brother, and I've been watching some of his stuff this week, Kenny, and I think he's going to go number 1 overall next year. I don't think there's any quarterback who's going to knock him off the top. Someone is going to have to emerge for that to happen, and I just think that Nick Bosa is just unbelievable. I just don't see the Seahawks being bad enough this year to be in position to take Nick Bosa. Ed Oliver's probably the next one that you're talking about. Houston, kind of an inside-out guy, could develop into a 3 technique if he adds size. I don't think they're going to be picking in the top 5 to get him. And then once you start moving down the list, you wonder, are you really going to find that impact player that you're looking for? Pass rushers generally are a bit hit and miss when it comes to the draft, and there's been a lot of busts in pass rushing. It's a hard thing to look at in college and say this compares and this translates to the next level. It's not always the fastest guy. Joey Bosa wasn't the fastest guy. It's a very difficult position to scout generally. So what are the Seahawks going to do? Are they going to roll with it for now? Are they going to bring in a stopgap? Are they going to see what cut down day brings? Are they going to do a trade? What are they going to do? I think this is the most interesting thing about this team over the next couple of weeks, Kenny, is to see what their plan is at the pass rush, whether they stick or whether they're going to twist. Because at the moment, great start from Rasheem Green, but I just really worry about how good this pass rush is going to be and whether it's going to be an issue for the Seahawks, especially now that secondary is missing some of the star names from previous years.
Yeah, and as far as that goes, I want to talk about the secondary briefly as well. What we've seen and what we saw last night, but also what we've seen throughout camp and heard and all these kinds of things. It still comes down to, I think that eventually Earl Thomas has to give in and he has to return. And I don't think the Seahawks are going to give in. And I think the Seahawks have most of the leverage. But I really also believe when you really look at it, it's going to be a significant difference in how the Seahawks defense responds and plays this way this year with or without Earl Thomas. Without Earl Thomas, I don't know how many wins you can really quantify to an all-pro safety. Maybe one. It's so difficult. Even like a quarterback is worth a lot, and every other position it's just not. And we've seen that over and over again. And I don't know how much you can assign to just him, but it does feel like there's going to be just a significant difference with or without Earl Thomas. And I mean, I know that feels like an obvious statement, but with Earl Thomas, without Earl Thomas, if it's Tedric Thompson, and there's another thing too. That was one of the players that I heard a lot about, and it was really confusing to me to just watch people, because Tedric Thompson gets some positive reports in camp, which is great. You want Tedric Thompson to be the future at starting free safety. That makes a lot of sense financially for the Seahawks, a young player that they drafted. And it would be great if Tedric Thompson turned into a great free safety. But already people talking like, well, if Tedric Thompson plays really well and Earl Thomas comes back, maybe Earl Thomas shouldn't even start. Earl Thomas is starting, okay? He's a Hall of Fame safety in the middle of his career, maybe into the second half of his career, but he's a Hall of Fame safety and he's doing just fine. And if Tedric Thompson plays great, then they have awesome depth. Maybe they figure out a way to get Thompson and Earl Thomas and Bradley McDougald all playing. I don't know, but there's no way that Earl Thomas isn't playing if he comes into the game and isn't starting. And, and I think that that's going to be a huge difference as far as from the front to the back of the defense, how much of a difference it's going to have. Bobby Wagner is an excellent leader, and, I think he's going to be doing a great job this year with or without Thomas. But Rob, as far as, seeing the secondary, how do you feel about that secondary? If it's just, all of these new guys, veteran Byron Maxwell, but, he wasn't around for the last couple of years. But how do you feel about this secondary without Earl Thomas, and how important would it be for him to come back?
I think he's dumb. I don't think I disagree with you, Kenny. I don't think there's a route. I don't think Pete Carroll can seriously turn around to his team and say that we're back about being all about competition, and then say to Tedric Thompson, you're on the bench today because despite the fact that you've been working your ass off for the last 2 months, Earl's back today and he's starting. Because he didn't want to. I just don't. I don't think that works. I think this is different to Cam Chancellor. I don't think that they can. Maybe it's different. If the first 2 or 3 weeks Tedric Thompson has an absolute nightmare, then it makes it easier to make that switch. But I think the only way that it happens now is if Tedric's terrible. And, you know, I sincerely hope that doesn't happen. And I don't think it's going to happen. I think that Tedric Thompson is a really good player. Wrote about him a lot going into the draft. I think that he's a playmaker. And yes, they're going to have to tweak the scheme a little bit. Might have to play 2 deep safeties a bit more. Probably not going to be able to play the single high like they've been able to do with Earl Thomas, but that's fine. You know, they would have had to have done that if they didn't draft Earl Thomas. I mean, they picked him at number 14, not number 1. I mean, there was a decent chance that Philadelphia were going to take him at 13 after trading up. So they were prepared not to have that great 4-3 runner as the single high safety. So they're going to have to tweak something a little bit for there. But I think that they're prepared to do that. And I think they look at the way that Tedric's played, and he's got so much praise, and Bradley McDougald seems to be taking on a leadership role, and Delano Hill had a decent game yesterday as well. And I just think they're ready to move on. And I think one way or another, I can see maybe Earl gets traded. You know, Dallas's secondary looked a bit poor against San Francisco yesterday. Whether he moves on that way, whether he even comes back. I mean, here's the other thing, Kenny. Does anybody really expect that Earl Thomas has got so far now? I think he's already been fined about $3 million, or will be expected to be fined about that. To me, he just seems like he's going to do a Dwayne Brown last year, which means that he's probably going to hold out until the last possible moment during the season, and then come back when he has to come back to accrue a season. And if he comes back midway through the season and Tedric Thompson's been playing every week and playing pretty well, I just don't see Earl Thomas coming back. I just don't. I can't see Pete Carroll benching a performing Tedric Thompson for Earl Thomas, and I think it's a real shame that it's ending this way. One final point on this: I wouldn't be surprised if Earl Thomas does some kind of Instagram post in the next few days or publishes another article, because I think he's losing. He is losing in the court of public opinion. He is not winning this battle. Nobody's talking about him. Nobody's bothered. People are bored of it. I sense there's a real boredom for the Earl Thomas saga. And people actually want to see Tedric do well. And I think they want to see him. I think there's people are rooting for him to step up and take the job now. And I think people are resigned to not having Earl Thomas. And I think they're not really bothered, really. I think people have just had enough. I think a lot of people just want this thing to end one way or another, whether it means he comes back or he's traded somewhere else. And he kind of needs public opinion on his side. He needs people sort of rallying for him. Otherwise, the Seahawks, they're under no pressure to do anything. And it's kind of just gone quiet ever since he did that piece for the Players Tribune. Everyone's just like, yeah. I mean, that didn't even really resonate with anybody. It was just like, yeah, okay, Earl's spoken again. You know, are you playing or not? I think that's what the fans want to know. And at the moment, he's not. So no one cares. And the only way that he's going to get that leverage back is if the Seahawks, I think his only card now that he can play is if a team loses a free safety in the first few weeks of the season and desperately need one and trades for him, and then he's willing to pay him, which I think is unlikely given he's a free agent in the offseason, or the Seahawks just have an absolute shocker of a start, and then people start clamoring and the safeties play is poor, and people clamor for Earl Thomas to come back. I think that's his only leverage play right now, because I think people have just had enough.
Yeah, I mean, I see it differently, but I also don't think that I can there's nothing that anyone can possibly say that like matters. Like, it's just nobody knows, and we all have our just opinions based on what we think, and I think you make a really good argument. And you know, I just see it a little bit differently in the sense that I just think it'll make more sense for him to come back earlier, and I don't think that any team's going to trade for him at a value that the Seahawks can find reasonable. So I think that they would rather just, you know, let him come back and then walk or whatever at the end of, you know, next year, and be totally fine with that. I don't see any team trading much for a safety at a time when safeties aren't valued that highly. So, like, it could happen. I mean, for sure. I don't think that if Earl Thomas is traded, or, you know, I think maybe his biggest play would be to retire or whatever, and then, you know, try like a Marshawn Lynch and come back in a year and then just say, like, hey, look, I'm willing to play for another team. You know, I'm not willing to play for you, so just trade me to them so I can play for them. Trade me to the Cowboys. You sent Lynch to the Raiders. Trade me to the Cowboys. Maybe he does something. I don't know. Not an expert on contracts, that's for sure. And I do think that hopefully he does come back, because I do think he makes the Seahawks better, and I think he'll probably make them better than Tedric Thompson would, and that doesn't mean any offense to Tedric Thompson. He's just not Earl Thomas that we know of. If Thompson is better for the Seahawks right now than Earl Thomas, then that is amazing news for sure. So, and would be welcome. But, as we wrap up this episode, a smaller episode, Rob, any final thoughts on the game as we, prepare for preseason week 2 next week?
I just think the one final thing I'd say is that a lot seems to have been decided already. I mean, I know there's more open competition at the moment. I just feel like we kind of know who are going to be the main players in the pass rush already. I think the offensive line seems set. I know a lot of people have been talking about Jermaine Ifedi, but the injuries there, and I thought Ifedi did okay, last night. I think you've got to give him a chance. I think people are too quick to write him off. So I think the offensive line's set. I think the receiver battle seems to be being decided already with David Moore getting a step on Amara Darbo. It looks like Brandon Marshall's very much part of what they want to do going forward. Jerome Brown. So, it almost feels like that's pretty much there, done and dusted. It does look as if Tedric Thompson's going to start with Bradley McDougald, and that Delano Hill and Alexander are not going to be able to get ahead of either of them now. I don't think Trey Flowers had a good game, but I don't think he's going to be penciled in as the starter in week 1. I think it's pretty much set that it's going to be Maxwell and Griffin there. So as much as the competition is sort of more open this season, I also think that we have some clarity on what it's going to be. The only real question marks, I suppose, are who's going to win the kicking job, because I think that Michael Dixon's going to win the punting job. He's punting well and is cheaper and is more long-term, and they've got good control over him. I think it's just whether is it going to be Myers or is it going to be Seabass who ends up being the kicker. And, it's not the most exciting battle for the next few weeks, but fingers crossed everybody stays healthy and it's going to play out as expected, because I think it's starting to take shape now that we have an idea of what this team's going to look like this year.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think for sure the offensive line, I mean, if they can go if they can go pole to pole, if they can go start to finish in this offseason with the same starting 5 offensive line, and that includes, basically everybody except for DJ Fluker being the offensive line for, the end of last year, that's that kind of continuity that, most teams crave and don't have. And the Seahawks certainly haven't had it for a long time. But I think more than anything, more than Tom Cable getting fired, more than whatever, Dwayne Brown is going to make the Seahawks offensive line look a lot better. He already is. And that should be, the biggest thing of all, I think, is probably Dwayne Brown. And I think the Seahawks come around with a lot of positives in their first game against the Indianapolis Colts. Next week, they play, Rob, I don't have it in front of me. Do you know who the Seahawks play next week?
That is a really good question. I don't. Can I just put one other quick thing? Akeem King, I thought played well. I think he's building some momentum. I won't be surprised if he makes the roster. I like what I see from him. And Justin Coleman just looks really. He is looking really good. He looked good last season, and already he's looking pretty good. And I think they're playing the Chargers next week. Yeah, it's off to sunny LA, where you are, Kenny.
That's correct. Hey, you got that right. Saturday, August 18th, 7 p.m., the Seahawks take on the LA Chargers, basically LA. The aforementioned Joey Bosa will be there. The Chargers already taking a lot of those injuries and bad luck that they always do every year early on in the year. And so we'll see if hopefully both teams come away unscathed after next Saturday. But that means we'll probably be back next Wednesday or Thursday to talk about the Seahawks again. You can follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Staten. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com to read his articles there. We are at Field Goals. You can go to FieldGoals.com to read there. This has been 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a Seattle Seahawks podcast. Come back next week for a brand new